Hello and welcome to the Image for Mama podcast. I'm your host, Abby Halberstadt, happy wife, mama to 10, Bible-believing Christian. And on today's episode, we're going to chat about something that I get asked about in DMs a lot and is very relevant to my current circumstances in life. I think it'll be helpful to you too. But before we dive in, I want to highlight our brand new podcast sponsor, Adele Natural Cosmetics. It is a family-owned, cruelty-free, toxin-free, handmade, small batch artisan company that produces cosmetics and skincare here in the USA. Arlene, the owner, found herself in a health crisis and realized that many of the labels that said quote unquote natural really weren't using natural products. So you'll find in Adele that you can read the ingredients easily. There's no toxins or anything gross in there to cause problems for your skin. I use and love the products personally, and I'll share more about them with you soon. I also want to talk about CHM. Christian Healthcare Ministries is an alternative to traditional insurance, which allows you to choose programs that work for your family, to organize and customize those programs so that different members are on different levels, whether it's bronze, silver, or gold. You can also pray for and be prayed for by Bible-believing Christians who share the same values that you do that also use CHM. And I love that they are giving you options to find doctors that are, quote, out of network, because there are no networks. They work with you to find the healthcare provider that works best for your family. And last but not least, I want to talk about Voteberg Music Academy. I got the pleasure of spending some time with the owners, Elisha and Katie Voteberg, just this last week. And I was struck again by their commitment to their family, their commitment to excellence, and their commitment to bringing quality products and teaching to the people that use their programs. Voteberg Music Academy is a way for your students to learn, be motivated, to have community that they have built into their programs, and they can do it by sharing lessons between siblings. You can use the code IMISForMama20 to get 20% off each month that you're enrolled, which brings your shared price per family down to as little as $35 a month, which just can't be beat. Okay, so I want to tackle this concept that I've kind of addressed in various ways, that I've danced around a little bit in other podcasts. And I would say not really danced around. I've discussed this in depth. I've talked about comparison and how it can be a trap and how it can also be a way to learn from other strengths. I've talked about staying in your lane. I've talked about seasons of life where your situation looks very different than someone else's situation. I've talked about having help and how no one does it all. But today I want to take that just a step further and address this concept, which is that no one is killing it all the time. I think that in a social media world, it can look like people have it all together all the time in every area of their lives, because it's so easy to just move the camera around, to shift a pile of junk away from the camera lens, and genuinely, without trying to dupe you. In fact, I'm not trying to dupe you, because I'm telling you, that is to some extent what's happening in the very room that I am in right now. This is what I call my girl cave. It's my office, essentially, although mainly I podcast in here, or we use it to store stuff for our company, Peyton Pros, where we make shirts and hats and prints and art. And that's what's happening right now on the couch that I'm looking at off screen. Now, I could focus the camera on you and you could call that potentially more transparent or whatever, even more so than just telling you that it's there. But of course, then you would have to look at boxes and shirts and things like that. And honestly, that is, I think, where some of the rub lies. People both want others to share their struggles and expose their kind of seedy underbellies or messy laundry piles. And at the same time, they want to only consume beautiful images and put together things that are palatable and easy to look at and enjoyable to watch. So there's that tension of be relatable, but don't be so relatable that I don't want to see what's on your couch, which is a hard balance to hold in a world where people's attention spans are pretty short and their field of acceptable content consumption can be really narrow. But that's just from a social media perspective. What I want to encourage you, and I've talked about this again, I've talked about this in other podcasts. If you want to go track down ones on comparison or seasons of life where your life might look different than someone else's, or having help and no one doing it all, like I mentioned those. I think those are in. I mentioned those again with specific words because I think those are pretty searchable titles. And they're probably a little earlier in my podcast schedule. So if you want to go searching for those, you can find them. I may have Ezra track them down. My son, who does my editing, track them down and put them in my show notes for me, so you guys don't have to look too far. But there's kind of another layer of just where we assume that if we see someone's highlight reel, either on social media or their house cleaned up when we've gone over there for dinner, or they prepared for a party, or whatever it is that makes us believe, if I see this glossy surface, if I see this clean bathroom, whereas mine is kind of a wreck, if all of their couches are clean instead of one of them has a bunch of shop stuff on it, then that must mean that every area of their life is in order. Now, what's funny about that assumption is that we know this is not true for ourselves. We all have strengths and weaknesses. We all struggle in certain areas more than others. And we all often find that balance is one of the hardest things to achieve in life. It's what we're striving for. And I don't think it's a bad thing to strive for at all. I think it's something to work toward consistently and improving your ability to achieve it until we go to see Jesus. But it doesn't mean that we're all killing it or finding that balance all the time. In fact, most of us are not. So I said that this was going to be personal. I try to make these podcasts personal, as in it's something that relates to something I'm going through, but it also is a broader principle. Because if we're just talking about my life, then that is minimally helpful to most of you. But if we're talking about something the Lord is teaching me, and I say, okay, I see a lot of women asking about this. This must be not just my situation, but something that a lot of people struggle with or need to hear, then that's more likely to end up on the podcast. So here we are. So I'll share this particular details. Right now, I am in a season which tends to happen in the last several years during the fall, where October ends up being very, very busy. A lot of people ask, I find this is true of my husband's work. He is a software developer who installs 911 dispatch software. And when he has to travel for it, it feels like everybody wants it at the end of the year. They've got a budget to spend. They've got to get everything done before January. And so all of a sudden he goes from not traveling as much to 4 or 5 clients need him at once between like October 1st and December 31st, which is obviously already kind of a busy time of year anyway. So I've seen this happen with his work. And then I've noticed that it kind of tends to happen with speaking engagements or events, as I've started to do those more in the last 3 to 4 years. So there were several things that I said yes to this fall, knowing that they were going to come one after another, and that I was going to have to prepare myself, my family, my household to run well while those things were taking more of my time, or while I was traveling, or Sean and I were traveling. And so we're in that season right now. I mentioned the Share the Arrows event, and that was on September 28th. It was a huge event, but it was in Dallas. So that was easy to drive to. And it was essentially, we went with our daughters, our twin daughters, and some friends the Friday before that event and did some birthday celebration. And then there was a dinner the night before, and then the event the day of. And then we came home and kind of recovered on Sunday. And then since then, I've actually had 2 events and a birthday trip all squished into one. And so Sean and I flew to Fayetteville, North Carolina, which when people heard that we were flying to North Carolina, and when I saw that it was in Fayetteville, and I didn't know exactly how close that was to Asheville or other affected areas by Hurricane Helene, I'm emailing and saying, how is everybody there at the church? Like, how can we pray for you? How can we help you? Is the event even still on? And Fayetteville was not largely affected by the hurricane. And so we flew there the weekend before last, and I spoke at a small women's conference at a church. And then Sunday, October 6th was my birthday, and we played a bunch of pickleball. And then, like, when I say a bunch, I really, really do mean a bunch. And then I actually flew out on Monday, which would have been October 7th, I believe, to the Wellness Collective, which is an event in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, that I've gotten to speak at a couple of times, but I was just attending this time as a vendor with my best friend. So it was kind of a combination of best friend time, birthday, and also having a booth there for our business Paint and Pros that I just mentioned. And that's where I got to see Elisha and Katie Votberg. They were speaking at the event, and their session was so good. I was at the vendor booth listening through the speakers because I didn't get to go upstairs and listen. And then this week has been plenty busy. We actually hosted our youth group on our new pickleball court. I can't remember. I think I've talked about the pickleball court here on the podcast. I've definitely talked about it on social media, but if I have not talked about it here on the podcast, we built a sport court over the summer, and it has been such a fun thing for our family, but also for having people over and for hospitality. So we had our youth group over for that this past weekend. Sean has traveled for work, and then we will actually go to my publisher, Harvest House Publishers, in Oregon next week because they have a 50th anniversary gala that they invited me to speak at, which is a huge honor. And I won't be the only speaker, but that I get to participate in is really, really fun. And then I will have one more speaking event for the year, and then I'll be done. Well, I mentioned that kind of the concept that we're dealing with is no one is killing it all the time. If you were to just look at my schedule from a speaker and author perspective, then you might say, oh, well, that sounds like you're doing really well. That sounds like a very, successful run of events and things. But if you were to look at my laundry room, actually my laundry room is okay right now because I've been tackling it and catching up. But if you were to look at my upstairs, for example, we need to sweep. We need to vacuum. We need to organize things. We need to throw things away and tidy things up. And that can and will happen. But it has been on the back burner because of travel, because when I get home, we're not going to spend all of our time cleaning. We have our daily routines, and I have a whole podcast where I talk about rhythms and things that you can put in place to make sure that the basics get covered and our downstairs gets taken care of. So our living room is picked up and our kitchen is picked up and our services are wiped down. We clean our bathrooms, that kind of thing. But when it comes to the upstairs, that's not getting as much attention. When you have 12 people living in a house, man, things can go downhill fast. The good news is that you can often take blitz cleaning sessions or 30 minutes at a time and take an area that looks pretty wrecked and turn it into something much better looking simply by wiping surfaces down and, boxing things up and putting things back where they belong if they haven't been. So that's kind of the mindset that I've been taking. We'll do these blitz cleanings. We'll get our homeschooling done. And then the rest of my focus right now is on making sure that I am connecting well with my children since I don't normally travel this much. And my mom helps us out when we are gone, and they love her. They adore her, really. And you guys adore her too. You've had, I have an episode with her on the podcast, and you guys loved that episode and have asked for her to come back. And maybe I'll convince her. It's not her favorite thing, but maybe I'll convince her to come back again. But she is so kind to help us out. I've talked many times before about how we hire her a couple of days a week to come and just do whatever needs doing, whether that's homeschooling or cleaning or making meals or running errands or whatever. And she is so kind to help with that. And then we also can rearrange those days because she has a pretty flexible schedule so that if we're traveling, then instead of our normal Monday, Thursday, which are our days that she comes, then she can come Friday, Saturday, or whatever works out to cover those days so that the kids have someone here that's responsible, that can help with small children and all of that. And I acknowledge that to be a huge privilege and a huge blessing to our family that we even have that option. And it is part of what makes it even possible for any of this to work. But I will say that when I'm here and I see that I'm quote unquote not killing it in the everything is tidy and picked up upstairs department, what I have to remind myself is what my priorities are. I am not exactly into the meme that says, it doesn't matter if your floors are sticky and your oven is disgusting, although I don't clean my oven very often. So maybe I'm in that camp after all. Everything is absolute chaos as long as you are spending lots of time with your kids. I think there is a balance. I think we do need to prioritize people over perfection in our homes. Absolutely. But also we don't need to convey to our kids that we will always prioritize fun or shirking duties or things like that. So when I say that no one is killing it all the time, what I want to convey to you is not that some people aren't more balanced than others. And I'm not referring to myself. I'm referring to people that immediately popped in my mind who seem to be able to, despite their schedules, despite the demands on their time, have their home neat and tidy, and they're still spending time with their kids. But there is some area, regardless of our propensity for assuming that they must just be better humans than we are, there is some area that they're struggling with. I can think of one particular friend of mine who is just a very type A, clean, neat, efficient, organized person, very kind and hospitable as well. The fact that she balances all of those things so well always just impresses me and encourages me and spurs me on and inspires me so much. But she also has a very type A, orderly, organized, neat and tidy husband. And as she says, I'm probably more so those ways now because my husband values them so much and they matter to him so much than I would be even on my own. So I think that that's just a side note that we have to realize that sometimes when someone is seemingly killing it in an area, they're doing it for their own personality, but they also might be accommodating someone else's personality and trying to be a blessing to that person by meeting their needs or even meeting their expectations. I know we say like expectations are joy killers and we have to be careful with those, but also, especially between spouses, understanding the level of mess that your spouse is capable of dealing with, all of those things can really help bring harmony and peace in your home instead of just being like, listen, that's not my personality. I'm not even going to mess with it. And I'm just going to let everything be a wreck. And he just needs to get over it or she needs to get over it. So this friend of mine that seemingly, quote, has it all together all of the time was telling me about our homeschool co-op and how she felt so behind and she was frustrated with herself because she hadn't, ordered all the books and organized all the things. And I found myself yet again kind of chuckling and going, see, Abby, you were doing it too. You were assuming that because she is so proficient and balanced in so many areas, because she is so organized and on top of things, that she couldn't possibly be behind in this area. And yet she was bemoaning, feeling like she wasn't on top of things. So one thing I want to encourage you is that when people acknowledge their faults, don't pounce on them and say, aha, see, you're not perfect. I knew it. But also believe them. I think we have a tendency to assume that people are either humble bragging or saying things to make us feel better, when in fact, it is totally okay to hear someone say, I struggle with balancing housework with time spent with my kids. And I tend to let the time spent with my kids go because I can't stand to have a messy house. Or I tend to let the house go because I'd much rather hang out with my kids and that's more fun. And I'm okay with the house being a mess. We hear people say these things. And if we don't see evidence of them, if we see the house that's been cleaned when we come over for dinner, we go, no, she was lying. She was just trying to make me feel good, or she was humble bragging. And in fact, she was probably telling you something that she actually struggles with. It's hard to admit those things and then have them brushed aside. It's hard to admit those things and have people assume either the worst or assume that we have some sort of ulterior motive for sharing other than just simply stating facts about things that we struggle with. And then choose to continue being transparent. Because I've had people tell me many times before, like, I've only seen your house when it's like this. You probably never have a mess. And like I said, I'm looking around my girl cave thinking, no, I need to tackle the mess up here. I need to vacuum my rug. And if you're like, well, I'm not a big vacuumer, Abby, so if vacuuming is the worst that you've got, it's not. I think that I might see some dog poop over in the corner if I'm going to be completely transparent, because our little puppy is not doing great at potty training. And she loves to come up to my girl cave as much as I do. And apparently that has not been picked up yet. So if we're going to take it to the very, very transparent level of nobody is killing it all the time, that would be an area where we are not killing it, potty training the puppy. So I definitely know what I'm going to be doing when I just spotted that when I am done with this podcast. So I just wanted to address this because one thing that we can do when we know there is a season coming up that's going to stress us and stretch us, but also we know it's what we're called to, is we can prepare our priorities. So what I was mentioning before is that my priorities right now are not necessarily getting to the house projects like a closet that I need to clean out and organize. That's not really, I did that some this summer when I wasn't traveling and I had more bandwidth and we weren't homeschooling and didn't have sports and other demands on our time. But I have a closet that I could stand to tackle, and I'm not even putting that on my list right now. I've just bumped it off the list because it's not going to get my merch organized for an event. It's not going to get my speech written for a conference that I'm speaking at. It's not going to get math taught to my fourth grader. It's not going to get dinner on the table. And so knowing your priorities when you're entering a season where things are just, you have a fuller plate than usual is really wise. Also, once we've prepared our priorities, and hopefully we've done so realistically and said, okay, no organizing closets, no fancy meals. We're going for nutritious and simple and straightforward. And we're going for getting the basics done as consistently as we can. Then you want to prepare your heart, because if you prepare your priorities and you say, these are my priorities in my head, but you don't actually follow that with your emotions, then you often find that there's cognitive dissonance between what you said were your priorities and what's actually happening in your house. And you find yourself really frustrated. So if you're expecting yourself, now, maybe this podcast is more for high achievers or for go-getter types or type A's, but I don't even consider myself type A. I always joke that I'm type B plus. Because I see people who live by a list and who kind of can't sit still if something isn't done. And I have some of those tendencies, but that's not me all the way by any stretch. But I think I'm also speaking to those who struggle with the tendency to have less motivation and to feel like if it's not perfect, it's not worth doing. And I really want to encourage you that perfection is the enemy of done. And I know you've heard some version of this before, but in a season of overwhelm or in a season of particular busyness or in a season where things are kind of outside your control and they're more than you would prefer them to be, and yet you still got to get the basics done. I want to encourage you, whatever your personality, whatever pendulum swing you're on, whether it's the everything has to be perfect and I'm going to kill myself and I'm just not going to sleep because I need to kill it all the time. But remember, nobody does. Not in every area, not all the time. Or whether it's the kind of, I feel overwhelmed, I'm just going to shut down and I'm going to curl up with a blanket and I'm going to ignore the pile of dishes that keeps getting bigger and bigger. And I'm going to tell myself that it's because I don't have the bandwidth. When in fact, if we prepare our priorities and we say, these are the main things, and I'm going to keep the main things during this particular season, whether it's like mine was, where I knew it was coming, or whether it's unexpected, where somebody falls ill, or you have a baby and you don't recover as quickly postpartum as you expected to, or your husband has to go out of town or gets deployed, or there's all of these circumstances that I could list that could throw you at least into an unexpected tailspin of overwhelm and frustration and feeling like a failure. Or it could easily drive me, has done in the past, into a season of being really harsh with your family because you've prepared your priorities, but you haven't prepared your heart. And maybe you didn't get a chance to. And so you're kind of taking it out on them. You guys aren't picking up the slack. Nobody cares about this house but me. Why aren't you guys on top of things like you need to be? And listen, I am capable of all of those things even now. And I think some of those reminders are fine. That's kind of our job as moms, is to keep the ship running, to do the reminders, to say, okay, maybe nobody else does care but me. They don't think of this. My children don't think of this as their house. And I remember feeling this way growing up. And I've talked about this before. I did not think of my room as my room, so I didn't decorate it. Yes, I lived in my parents' house, and yes, it was my room, but I didn't feel true ownership over it. And it wasn't until I felt true ownership over my own home and the responsibility lay on my shoulders that I really felt any kind of creative spark or desire to beautify it or to put my own personal stamp of identity on it to make it unique to my own family. So I want to encourage you that those two things even if you're thrown into a season of not killing it because you just can't in every area, you can backtrack and say, okay, so my husband's traveling way more than I thought he would, or he got a new job and his schedule is completely different, or everybody's sick all the time. We have definitely been in that season. We have been in the way too many people sick for way too long season and are coming out of it, praise God. But you kind of have to pivot and say, what are my expectations? Are my expectations that I keep going full steam toward my goals and my standards of excellence? Or do I kind of say, this is a season that the Lord has me in. This is the day that the Lord has made, this day, not tomorrow. And I will rejoice and be glad in it, instead of I will be stressed and overwhelmed and determined to keep up with the Joneses. Or the flip side being, I will shut down and curl up in a ball and ignore my responsibilities, because I think those are two sides of the same coin. We are all capable of being either, I think, depending on our personalities and kind of the mental state that we're in when we find ourselves in a season of overwhelm. I would not currently describe my season as overwhelm. I have been there before. I've even been to the point of burnout. That was a year ago when I was releasing a book dealing with horrible back pain and dealing with a house flood and having to move out of our house. I definitely got to the, okay, I'm done. And my priorities were very simple. And my heart expectation had to be adjusted many, many times. Right now, I feel more like I have such a realistic expectation, which is that my last speaking event is on November 2nd, I believe. We will be preparing for Christmas. We will be leading up to Thanksgiving. We will be winding down our studies for the year. And I know that if I can be consistent with homeschooling when I'm not traveling, and trust that my kids and my mom will handle it when I'm gone, if I can stay caught up with laundry or do my absolute darndest to do so, if I can cook dinners at home as often as possible, if I can spend really quality time with my children very consistently and prioritize that over, like I said, projects that can wait for a Christmas break or a spring cleaning or something like that. They aren't the projects that help my family to thrive. They're the projects that make me happy because that closet is organized. I give that as an example. Or the garage has been tackled, or I've decluttered something, or changed out all of my kids' clothes to the next size. Those things need to happen. But when we say the phrase, nobody is killing it all the time, that means that there's always going to be times in our life where we can't get to everything. Actually, that's going to be all the time when we can't get to everything. Nobody does, quote, it all. But I love that the Lord gives us seasons. And again, I have a whole podcast on this, where we have more capacity, and seasons where, if we're completely honest, our capacity is narrowed, and we would do well to prioritize and prep our hearts for that, so that we don't just feel either down on ourselves, down on our family, resentful of others who seem to be doing better, or covetous of their abilities as they are seemingly doing better. So this is a little bit of the, I don't know who needs to hear this, but at the same time, I think every woman needs to hear this. Whatever you see happening on the internet, whatever you see happening in your neighbor's home, I don't want you to just push it aside and assume that it's all a front and it's all a lie and they're putting on a show. Quite likely, certain aspects of what you see that are shiny and pretty and organized are absolutely true. But I also don't want you to assume that every single closet looks like that, even if that turns out to be true. When we assume that, we can easily beat ourselves up for those times when we need the closets to be messy and dinner to be on the table and kiddos to be snuggled. For me, that looks like playing pool with my middle boys, who absolutely love to play pool, and my girls, the twinsies, love to play pool as well. It looks like playing pickleball with Ezra and Sean out on our new sport court. It looks like taking a kid out to dinner, or tonight Della and I are going to a banquet for a local pro-life organization. And so I feel good about those priorities. Now, do I still need to do some cleanup upstairs? Yes. Will it get done eventually as we all work together? Yes. Are there times in my life when that would have stressed me to the point that I couldn't enjoy the banquet tonight? Yes. But I think once we have adjusted our priorities, our expectations, and our heart postures, that simple, freeing phrase, nobody is killing it all the time, releases us not to not try, but to have a reasonable, measured, joyful response to those seasons when inevitably we can't keep up with everything, or we keep up with the things that we have to at a slower pace, or maybe with less attention to detail. And that's okay. That is not an excuse or a permission for slovenliness or for mediocre effort. It's called being realistic. And so I think one of the reasons I wanted to address this, other than the timeliness of my own life, because like I said, I've been anticipating the season of like, this is going to be a busy month. October is just going to be busy, and that's all there is to it. But it's not going to last forever. But the other reason is because of November and December, and the fact that this Christmas season, we can get so wrapped up in all the things we wish we were doing, all the magic we wish we were creating, all of the memories we wish we were getting perfectly captured on our cameras and our phones. And we can lose sight of the fact that the ultimate no one is doing it perfectly all the time, no one is killing it all the time, is all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And yet, by grace, through faith, we can be saved just by trusting in and declaring Jesus is Lord of our lives. And if Jesus is Lord of our lives, there is so much grace, not to go on sinning so that it may increase, by no means, but to prioritize and ask the Lord for wisdom on where our focus can be, to invest well in our families. And if that means teaching them how to clean the house with you, well, then that's a great priority as well. To celebrate the joy of Jesus' birth in whatever way your family chooses to do that, whatever traditions you have, and to make the main things the main things. Because so often the idea of, quote, killing it or being a boss babe or hustling has nothing to do with excellence in Christ and everything to do about our own personal achievements, which should never be the main thing. I hope this is an encouragement to you as you enter this busy holiday season, or just as you go forward in life on a random Wednesday. And I really want to just spur you on to look to the Lord in every area of your life instead of looking to what other people are doing. You never know exactly what's going on behind the scenes. If you enjoy the MS for Mama podcast, I would be so honored if you would subscribe and follow along, maybe share with friends, or even leave a review. And if you want more content on motherhood and biblical responses to cultural issues, be sure to follow along on Instagram at m.is.for.mama.